We gaan beginnen.
Building a solution for a real customer problem. It helps you to build the right kind of product and to build it in the right way. And most importantly, maybe for organizations, it actually helps you to build a product that makes more money than it costs. Because we have a large enough target audience, a big enough problem that people want to get solved, and a big enough problem that people actually want to pay for it getting solved. So who should be involved in product discovery? Well, that can actually be a lot of different people. But most importantly, I think being product people, we definitely need to be involved in product discovery. So whether you're a product owner or a product manager, you should definitely be there. Probably some key management stakeholders. Maybe they're not involved throughout all the discovery sessions that you're gonna do, but at least you need buy-in from senior management to make this a success. If they keep pushing for delivering more stuff instead of discovering what customers actually need, it may become more difficult in actually doing this. Of course, it would be useful to include some people from the business, maybe some senior users or key users. Of course, your designers, maybe UX designers, developers, maybe some folks from marketing. And of course, real customers and users. They may not necessarily join the team as such, but of course, for giving feedback, they are really important. And what you may have noticed is this small line in the bottom right of the screen. So I would say that any stakeholder that really pushes you to deliver more features, those should be the ones that also need to be included in these kinds of steps. Those folks that keep on pushing for delivering more, maybe it's helpful if they actually understand that we want to discover what is the right thing to build. So how does it work? Well, basically, product discovery consists of 6 steps. I see a comment from Martijn that Marty Kagan's book also describes product discovery well. Curious to see if he describes the same steps. Typically, the process starts out though with alignment. And alignment is basically all about making sure that we're all on the same page regarding the people who join this discovery effort. So that means probably your development team, those stakeholders again, maybe you want to kick off with some users or customers who explain what kind of problems they're facing. So basically an alignment meeting so that we're all working to solve the same customer problem. Then once we have some alignment on what this customer problem is, we want to research that problem in more detail. And that basically means try to look from as many different angles on the problem as possible. So for example, do some observations, look at what people are actually doing, do some interviews or other ways of getting more quantitative data. You can look at what people say. So what's their attitude? What are they actually saying about the problem or the product? And the idea is, of course, to capture all that data. And for example, empathy maps or persona canvases can be a great way to capture all that information that you've learned. Once that research is done, we move on to ideation. And this is all about brainstorming as many different ideas as possible, given the customer problem. And the idea for ideation is to brainstorm about a lot of different options. So the biggest pitfall in this step is actually to do some brainstorming and just go for a solution that is already known to a lot of people. Because we've used it in the past, it's already known to us. So the biggest trap here is to get stuck or get hung up on the first ideas that basically pop up. Once we've done some ideation, it's time for some creation. And basically, this is the part where we all get excited, right? We can actually get to build some stuff. However, that doesn't mean that we should actually build something that is completely done or that is really shippable or that's close to the actual end state or the product that we have envisioned. So in this creation step, it's actually about creating stuff like paper prototypes or landing pages, maybe simulations or Concierge MVPs, clickable prototypes. So these are more lightweight creations that we're actually going to build. Because the next step is to do some validation. And what we always find interesting is that those MVPs built in organizations, they take like 3 to 9 months of design and development and testing, etc. And that's basically way too much for product discovery. We want to identify customer problems, we want to research them, create ideas, do validation as quickly as possible. So doing 3 to 9 months of a product discovery effort for one problem, that may be a bit too long. So think of smaller experiments. And a way to do this validation is, for example, with test and learning cards. And you can find some templates online, for example, by Strategizer. And they have a great way of designing experiments and capturing learnings afterwards. And then the final step is actually to do some refinement. And this is more refinement on the idea that we have in mind. So for example, refining a big customer problem or the big solution that we have envisioned into smaller product backlog items or product goals. Maybe you want to use a story map. So this is really refining the items, well, basically to get ready for some development work. Hope that makes sense so far. Let's see. Yeah, so is validation not something should be done in every step? Yeah, I think so. We do all these steps to do some validation, but there's different kinds of. So we first want to validate that this is actually a customer problem. Therefore, we're doing some research. Once we've done some research, we move on to ideation, create some potential solutions. So in every step, we indeed do some validation. And the one mentioned in this model is basically to really validate that this solution that we have envisioned actually solves the customer problem in a way that the customer feels is fit as well. So that's more the validation in this part. So let's take a look at each of these steps. Starting off with alignment. So what are some things you can do as a product owner to do more on the alignment part? Well, one of the things that tends to work very well is to use this simple customer problem statement card. It's a simple template you can fill in for a problem, basically describing what it is that the customer is facing and how it makes the customer feel. Once we've got such a thing, a really nice technique to use is a so-called mission briefing, or maybe kickoff in a more traditional sense. And the important part of this mission briefing is to make sure that the whole product discovery team, the team who's going to do this discovery effort, is really aware of what's the context of this problem, what's the higher intent or basically mission intent for this effort, what do we want to achieve as a team, what are some key tasks that we need to perform or things to deliver, and what are some boundaries for this effort. And another one to do alignment is pretty similar to what we're all familiar with in the form of a daily scrum. However, this time we won't necessarily be talking about what we've done or what goal we want to achieve, but more what have we learned as a discovery team? What are the hypotheses that we have for this week? And what do we want to experiment with? What experiments are we going to run? How will we measure success and capture learnings? And those weekly alignment meetings really help us to focus more on what it is that we want to discover. So over to research, Chris.
Yeah, research. If you can just throw all three of them down there, then because I was going through the notes. Oh, maybe I'll explain this from right to left. Right. So because what I usually do is I have this idea about the problem that we're trying to solve, but I have no clue if this is true. It's just an assumption. So one of the things that I do is look at things like Google Trends, Statista, maybe some Facebook experiments. What I'm trying to do is gather data around the symptoms. Not so much the solution, but the symptoms. You know, Robin and I designed the stance of the product owner, but we didn't come up with that at first. We went for the symptoms. We saw people struggling with how to do experiments, with how to make decisions, how to collaborate. And you research the symptoms because people don't know what they need. So they won't talk about the solution, but they will talk about the symptoms and recognize that. A second step would be to do more in-depth interviews and observations. I like observations because they're relatively low cost, but they can also reveal things that you have a blind spot for. the lead designer of the Toyota Camry. It was known to spend a lot of time in the US when he was researching the new model. And every time he would rent the old model and then drive around the US, because that was the primary market, and talk to people who had the same cars. Hey, you have the same car as I. What do you like about it? What do you don't like about it? And he discovered that, particularly in the US, they travel a lot. They use the bigger cars to travel to their families when you're having a lot of children. And the children are in the back, and it's like a long drive. It's a couple of hours. It's not like in the Netherlands. But so that can be troublesome for the parents. So he came back to Japan and decided to spend a large portion of the budget on the, let's say, the rear part of the car, which was really uncommon. So the backside is really well furnished. They have cup holders. They have a way to put your iPads and stuff like that. So your kids will be quiet, so the parents will be happy, so they can drive happily to their family. So that's typically something you review from an observation or an interview. And now you need to figure out, is that just a one thing that I discovered, or is it a large thing? And this is where surveys come into play. So that's sort of the order I would want to go through it. Find a problem, define the problem using observations, interviews, and only then start using a survey to confirm your findings or debunk your findings, and you might have found a local optimum. So that's how I would do a practical take on researching user problems.
Yeah, definitely. So once we've done that step, there's some tools and techniques for solution ideation as well. And these are some commonly used ones. For example, the mission impossible, which is basically about setting a literally mission impossible to achieve. So questions in this technique could be something like, well, we want to double our sales before the end of this month. Or we want to increase our sales with 50% before tomorrow evening. So literally missions impossible. And it's a relatively short exercise used to generate a lot of different ideas for really complex problems. Another fun one is the Crazy Eights, which comes from the Google Design Kit. And that's a way of allowing people to sketch 8 different ideas in 8 minutes. So again, this is a really fast exercise to kind of push people beyond the first ideas that pop up. And like we mentioned earlier, the biggest pitfall in the solution ideation step is to go for something familiar. So if you just have a lot of people brainstorm for 8 minutes, make 8 different sketches, we have a lot of different ideas. And another interesting one is negative brainstorming. So that's actually reformulating your problem the other way around. So instead of saying something like, how may I write the best possible blog, rephrase it into, how can I do the worst possible blog? And that's something maybe some of you are familiar with liberating structures kind of stuff. And this is more like a TRIZ kind of exercise maybe. Yeah. So once we have those ideas, it's time for some experiments.
Yeah. And the easiest and probably the cheapest one is paper prototypes. So you just grab a sheet of paper and you scribble some designs that you test with users. And you could use the Crazy Eights to generate many ideas, then combine them and end up with a paper prototype. But the power is that you can very low key put it in somebody's hands and say, hey, imagine that the app would look like this, or the application would do this. What would you think about it? And that's a really cool way to get user feedback. In one of my last sessions, I ran an experiment with voice-controlled auto navigation or car navigation, and we would do this by using paper prototypes and just a human mimicking the voice, and get great feedback on how users would actually interact with that at virtually no cost. Another way would be like Dropbox, how Dropbox did it. And I'm not sure how old the audience is, but we're back in the days. Back in the days, we had file sharing, and file sharing was like FTP service. You had to log into Unix machines and open up a file transfer. And at some point, you could do it from the Windows Explorer. But if you forgot to set the bin flag, your files would get corrupted. You had Microsoft SharePoint, where files would go to die because they just get lost. And Dropbox had an alternative to that, but only they just had this idea of creating an alternative to that. And to gauge the interest, they created these explainer videos, which they put on YouTube saying, we have this amazing product and this is how it works. and you put a file in this folder and it magically appears somewhere else, and it has a little flag saying it's synchronizing, and then it's synchronized. Ah, it's magic. All these things were fake. They just made these videos up, but the videos went viral. Because many people recognize the symptoms and say, hang on, I have this latent pain when I'm trying to share files, and this could actually solve my problem. So that's a great way to validate your assumptions. And another one would be feature fake, like you put a button in your app or in your website that doesn't really do anything, but it registers the clicks. So you know how often people actually click on it, and that gives you some feedback on whether people want this functionality. I know I can hear some people in the audience thinking, yeah, but we're a serious company and we can't go about adding fake buttons to our website. So and this is actually a screenshot from the Bank of America. And the feature is called Lost My Credit Card, which is a pretty serious thing. So you lost your credit card, you open your phone, you're already nervous, you press this button, and a pop-up comes saying, that's interesting. Well, you can't do this from the mobile application. Here's a phone number you could dial in order to report your credit card missing. So if a bank can actually do this, you can do this. So experiment with that. And I can imagine that the product manager back at Bank of America had some real interesting data to show his stakeholders, saying, look, this is how often it happens. This is the consequence. This is the number of people that actually went out and dialed the number. This is how we can help our customers. This is what value means. So great experiments.
Indeed. And once we have those different experiments and creations in place, there are some other experiments you can do as well for some more validation. And that could be something like a concierge MVP. And like the image shows, one of the tests that was basically done is, or the assumption problem to solve is people need to cook basically every day at their homes, and probably they want to find some good priced ingredients in the supermarket or products on sale. And what they basically tested out is, let's send the chef over to people's homes, ask them what they like to eat, what kind of allergies they have, etc. Then the chef would go to the local grocery store, find some items that would be on sale that week, create a couple of recipes, and then come back to people saying, well, this is what you could eat in the rest of the week. Basically matching, hey, what kind of stuff is currently on sale? What do you like to eat? And therefore create a nice menu. A setup like that could be done via a website, could be done via automation. Some of those companies already exist these days. But if you want to start out validating if this is actually a good idea and something people would be willing to pay for, maybe a concierge MVP kind of setup could be a great way of testing your ideas without actually building anything. So all the work done here is all manual labor. A more advanced version, you could say, of that kind of MVP is actually a Wizard of Oz. And instead of building everything, you can think of how Zappos started out, basically taking some pictures of shoes in the local stores, putting them on a website. People could then order their shoes on the website, but all the other work would still be manual labor. And so there's kind of a digital front where people can actually buy some stuff, but all the stuff on the back is all done manually. And so basically purchasing the shoes in the store again, shipping them to people, handling returns, doing the billing, all of that stuff was still done manually. And another nice validation test is a price test. And so see what people would be willing to pay for the product, see if doing different kind of pricing models would work. And in that sense, basically experiment and validate if people would be willing to pay for this solution. So the final step. What can we do for refinement, Chris?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that all of you are aware of user story mapping, right? Jeff Patton came up with this idea of breaking down user stories along the activities of a user that the user goes through, and then adding levels of detail. Now, one way you could do this is think of it as a lifeboat strategy. What if I only had one day to make an experiment? Oh, then I would probably do this. What if I had 2 days? Oh, then I could do a little bit more. What if I have a week? And sort of use that to go up and build your layer of detail. What if I've had a month? It also works the other way around. If you find it difficult and you have all this idea, make a story map of all the things that you could do, and then break it down to the minimum steps you go through. And it's typically a way to bring you back to the essence of what you're trying to learn. Another way to look at it, and it's similar to a story map, but the customer journey map adds a dimension of things outside the system. So actors that could be involved, maybe people in the ecosystem, people that service your product, market it, channel it, they can be put in the picture. But you can also look at, or you will also look at the emotions of the customer. So you're looking for moments of despair and moments of delight, moments where they're really excited about the solution or how the journey is going, which could be your product, but could also be the packaging or something else around it. A moment of despair, which could be the service or the activation of the product. And then design experiments that improve that particular part of the journey. And MVP has been a misused term over the years. MVP, according to Eric Ries, who coined the current term, so probably knows best. According to Eric Ries, is the minimum amount of effort that you need to do in order to validate a hypothesis. That's it. So it's not the crappy 1.0 version of your product. It's just something there to actually to experiment and figure out if your hypothesis is correct. So it could be the functionality. It has something to do with reliability, but it also needs something of a design. I've also worked with companies and tried to coin the phrase minimum lovable product. So the customer needs to be able to fall in love with your product. If it's really so crappy that it's just bare minimum, people won't use it. And if they don't use it, you won't get the feedback that you're looking for. So they need to be able to fall in love with it. So make sure your MVP covers a bit of brilliant design, a bit of usability. It doesn't break down all the time, and it solves the customer problem.
All right. Loic just added to the chat, maybe talking about a walking skeleton instead of an MVP. That could definitely be a way of dealing with it as well. So we need to kind of work towards closing it off, and maybe a couple more things to share with you. This is what we typically think that product discovery is all about, especially if we look at our stakeholders. They kind of have the sense that we just move from alignment to research ideation. We can all plan this stuff and just go through the different phases. The interesting thing, though, is that how product discovery typically works in real life is actually much more like this. So instead of moving through all the phases one by one in a straightforward linear process direction, it's actually more complex, and we might just work from ideation back to research. And once we get close to refinement, maybe we need to move back to creation again. So it's a bit more complex than that. And one of the questions that was also just asked in the chat is, so when do you do product discovery, or how does it actually align with Scrum? And I think there's a couple of different options. So just a quick question, which of these would you say actually works best?
Let's call the
which
top
of these
one.
Setups would you go?
Yeah, let's call the top one A, the second one B, and the third one C.
And the differences are basically that in the first setup, we first do some discovery, then hand over to team B for delivery, and that continues all the way. A second setup could be, well, do discovery and delivery in parallel with two different teams. And the last one could be, let's do discovery and delivery within one team. All right. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So most would go for option C, a couple of A's, and some. Well, it depends. And of course, well, I guess it indeed depends. Maybe the first solution could be a good idea, but probably you want to work on some products that have a really high cost for change. Yesterday, I just talked to Chris about a friend of his building boats. Well, if you want to build malls, malls for basically building the boat frame, well, probably that's so much of an effort that you don't want to do the discovery and the building of the malls in one single go. And that's just too expensive, too much work to do that in one time. So they will probably focus more on discovery first. What does the mall need to look like? And then basically move into delivery. For any digital product or software product, probably the other two options are better. And I would say that indeed option C would be best for most digital products, where we can actually combine both at the same time. Hope that makes sense. So the final thing that we would like to share, feel free to stick around for a couple of more minutes to ask some questions. But of course, we want to give you some things that you can actually do today to make it practical. And Chris, which are those things?
Well, the first thing, we get out of the building. So talk to people. They are out there using alternatives to solutions to solve their problems. So talk to people, go out, observe. That would be really my thing for today. The second thing is, don't try to solve everything. Look at how important people think that the problem is compared to other work that they do, and how much it impacts their lives. If it's a big impact and there's a high uncertainty, do those first. And what the other thing that you can do, schedule your first alignment meeting. We actually had written down, do a kickoff together with your stakeholders, but you probably can't do a kickoff today, but you can schedule that meeting. Make sure you get everybody on the same page on this. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do today.
Definitely. So final thing, good to remember for last week is last week we do not have a value stream at 9 o'clock. Instead, next week we have the Decision Maker Masterclass, which was supposed to be the end of the series on next Wednesday from 12 to 2. And I would actually expect some nice birthday songs to be ready because the 8th of December is actually my birthday. So a nice way to celebrate that with you all. And like I said, the Masterclass is the final one of the series. However, we asked around in the community and a lot of positive feedback about these sessions was shared. So the value stream will be back on the 6th of January. And the question that we have for you is, which topics would you like to see being addressed there? Probably not for the 6th itself, because we have some ideas for that one. But what kind of topics would you like to see being addressed in 2021? If you want to learn more about product discovery, here are some nice articles that we would recommend for you, including a pretty practical guide, which is the final QR code to set up product discovery. And then we would like to thank you all for joining this episode again, and hopefully see you next week in the Masterclass.
See a lot of good days, and we'd like to pass that on to everybody. So enjoy your day, have a great day, and do some discovery today. And we'll put all the stuff as usual in the community. So the links will be there, the presentation will be there, the PowerPoint will be there, the recording will be there. So you should be able to find all the resources there as well.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this episode, move on to the next one, or
join us or follow us on Medium and LinkedIn to get inspired with even more content.
Or come to our training.